And we're talking about percents, and we're going to talk about how to solve percents using proportions, because we've just done a bunch of other things using proportions, right? Where we set up the proportion and we could cross multiply and divide. So we can set up percent problems as proportions. We will also talk about using an equation to set up a percent problem. When I give you percent problems, if it would be on a test, you can choose whichever method works for you. Okay? Some of you might feel like this method feels like that's kind of extra. I already know how to do this. I don't need to do that. For some problems, that might seem in one way is more obvious. For other problems, this may be the way that I can set this up this way every time, and it's obvious to me if I set it up this way, so I'll just do this way every time. Okay? So keep an open mind, and like I said, you will have the choice of which way you want to use, but I'm going to show you a couple ways. So when we talk about the percent proportion, what we're always thinking of, first off, is that percent means per 100. So the percent number is going to go up here, above the 100. And then this is my part, and this is my total. Many times, and I might slip and say this sometimes, instead of total, I might say base. So just know if I talk about the base, I'm also talking about the total. We might also see this called whole. All right, so I've also pulled together some resources from multiple places, and so like when we were talking about, is the ratio part to part or part to whole? Part to whole, right? So that would be the reason I would probably slip into saying whole, because it matches what we were talking about when we identified our ratios. So just know any of those three words. Not trying to make life harder than it has to be, but just so that you're aware, all of those words, not just the word total, any of those words could be what I would put at the bottom. All right? And you can ignore the part at the bottom. This says drag things because it was set up so that, like in Google Slides, you could do an activity. And I just printed that, so. So if I want to solve, then I'm going to place things in the right positions. So 30%, well, that's pretty obvious. It's the percent. So the 30 is going to go above the 100. And then when you think about the other parts, the whole is going to follow of. So of 90 means 90 is the whole thing. And we don't know what the part is. We're looking for the part. I guess I should have used N because they had an N over here. But whatever letter, choose a letter. I'll put an N just so it's consistent with what we have there. Now that we have it set up, we could cross multiply and divide. So if I crisscross, I get 100N is equal to 2700. When I divide, I get that N is 27. And so for those of you who maybe have a different way that you normally find 30%, if you check it, 30% of 90, yes, it is 27. Okay? All right, and we'll talk about the other way later, but for now we're just going to look at proportions. And then this actually, basically, I just did it on the other screen. Sorry about that. Not so familiar with these problems, so I jumped the gun a little bit. So if we write an equation from the cross products, this would just be where we have our 100n is equal to 90 times 30. So 100n is 2700. We solve the equation, so now n is 20. Oh, I guess I have to divide. They're kind of drawing this out a little bit for me, but obviously I would not force you to write all of these steps, but these would be the steps. And then n is 27. Okay. And you could double check to make sure that if you put 27 where the n is, that we would cross multiply and they would be the same. Okay? So, whatever is after the word of is going to be our whole or our base. And of course, the percent's an easy one to place because it has a percent sign. So 4% of 50. What is 4% of 50? So I usually place my percent first just because it's easy, because it has a percent sign. 50 follows of, so it's going to go on the bottom, because that's where the base or the whole is always going to follow of. And then this means this is my missing number. So then 100x is equal to 200. X then is equal to 2. And hopefully just thinking about that, if 4% is 4 out of 100, 50 is half as much as 100, correct? 50 is 1/2 of 100, so 4% of 50 should be half of 4, which is 2. So there could be many ways you might just figure that out, mental math. But when we start getting things with decimal, not a whole number percent, not nice numbers that go into 100 evenly, it's going to be helpful if we have a strategy that we can use any time. So this time, what percent of 25 is 12? So, where would my numbers go? My numbers go where? Yeah, I guess. What's that? 12 on top, 25 on bottom. So, notice it says of 25. So, of, whatever goes with after of is going to be down here. The one after is, or before is sometimes, is going to usually be up here. And then this is where our percent goes. So when it says what percent, then in this case I know that's what I'm looking for. Yes, X is fine. Yeah. I usually write X also, but then I saw an N and I thought, oh, maybe I'll use N. But it works the same. Okay, so if you look at the next page, or the next slide, if we slide down, then we can solve that by cross multiplying. Hopefully the cross multiplying is not any issue since we've had to do that for other things. And we come up with 48 as an answer. So when I cross multiply, I'm doing the whichever direction you want. I usually start at the top left, but if you want to have your variable on the left, that's okay too. So 1200 is 25n, and then when we divide both sides by 25, then we get 48. Now, when we get a whole number like that, we need to read back what the question says, because the question says what percent So we should say 48%. Okay. So 48% of 25 is 12. Think about, is that reasonable? 50% is 1/2, correct? So is 12 a little bit less than half of 25? Yes. So you can always run through some like reasonable checks in your mind to make sure, like some benchmarks, like I know at 50%, that would be a half. Okay, half would be 12.5. So yeah, it should be really close. So 48%. If I set this up wrong, my answer is going to be way off and not be reasonable. So we have another one that is what percent. So as soon as I see what percent, then I know my X or whatever letter I choose to use is going to be on my top of my 100. Of goes on the bottom, so of 40. And then 14 is on top. So when I cross multiply, whichever, this could be on the left or the right, but 40x is 1400. Then we're going to divide by 40. And what does x equal? 35%. Thank you. That's right. That's right, Jess. Own that. Own that. Okay. For a second, then I thought you were that Kayla was the one talking instead, and that I just said the wrong thing. All right, 5 is 4% of what number? So again, I see my percent, so I know my 4 is on the top because it's the percent. It has to be on top of 100. Is the 5 going to go on the top or the bottom? The top. Why on the top, Elion? Okay, so 5 is, and then we said of goes on the bottom, and it says of what? So after of, it says what? So that's the number we don't know. So that's where my x or my n, whichever variable you choose. And then once again, they've solved that for us at the right. When we cross multiply, we would have 4n is equal to 500. Then we would divide to get 125. Does the 125 this time, should it have a percent sign?
No.
Okay, you're correct. No, it should not. We're not going to have two numbers in the same problem with percent signs, right? We already had 4%. So we only want to add that percent sign if the question said what percent something is. So same kind of problem. We're looking for our whole or our base or our total because we don't have the of what. So my 10 is my part. 15 is, of course, my percent. And again, we're looking for that base number, that whole. So 15x is 1,000. Okay, so we may have to do some, decimal. So 1,000 divided by 15. So we could say 66.67. And then I've also, yesterday I gave you guys a colored sheet. You guys have that colorful sheet?
Yes.
The colorful sheet hopefully is a good reference. Right? You can see an example of each time. The whole is again also called the base or the total. And then we have some things with equations there. Equations, yes, equations. I know, I'm back to the beginning. Just when you thought it was over, I'm going all the way back to the start.
I got the answers now. The very last page.
This is the very last page, isn't it?
The packet we were just on.
Okay, so we are going to look at percent equations next. All right, we're going to look at percent equations next. And I'm going to write up here at the top my name. I'm going to fill in my name. But I'm going to write so this is like on your colored sheet, right? Like on your colored sheet. So our percent times the whole, or the base, I'm going to call it base instead of that, is equal to our part. So when we see the word of, I want you to think multiply. When you see is, I guess I should use something besides an equal sign there. How about of is multiply, is equal? Because then I was going to write equal on both of them. That kind of looked weird. So 25% of what number? Now here is the trickier part with equations. With equations, we need to change the percent to a decimal, which is why we spent some time talking about that previously. So 25% as a decimal, 0.25. Of means times. 176 is equal to x. Same problem if I do a proportion. 25 over 100 equals something over 176. In the proportion, we don't need to move the decimal because during the work on the proportion, bless you, we will divide by 100, right? When we multiply, we'll still be multiplying 25 and 176. Then when we divide by 100, the decimal is going to jump 2 places to the left. Here, when we change it to a decimal, we've already divided by 100 by moving the decimal to shake off the percent sign. Both of these problems, we get the same answer. Okay? So if you don't feel as comfortable moving the decimal, I don't know if I moved it right, how many places, which direction, you may want the proportion, because then you're just going to do the proportion steps and you'll be good. So the equation, we have to do a little bit of work. So that's my x is equal 0.90 times 20. Or I could have simply said 0.9 times 20. So I'm going to set some more of these up with just the percent equation. And then just know, like, you could set any of them up with proportions also. 24 is, we don't know what percent of 30. So if we have a problem like that, now our constants rather, are not on the same side. So I would need to divide by the 30. And I get 0.8. But then I have to change, if I'm looking for the percent, then I have to change the decimal to a percent. Because the answer is not 0.8%. The answer is actually 80%. 0.8% would be less than 1 out of 100. And we can see that 24 is more than half of 30, so we better get an answer that's more than 50%. So if you're given the percent, it needs to be changed to a decimal if you're using the equations. If you're looking for the percent, you're going to get a decimal, and then you're going to change it to a percent at the end. Okay? So these kind of things like, ooh, I'm afraid I won't know when to do this. That may be you just want to use the proportion every time. Okay? So for the proportion, we would have done 24 on top, 30 on bottom because it's after of. We don't know the percent over 100. Then I have 30x is equal to 2,400. And when we divide, we have 80. Right? So we don't have to worry about moving decimals. So for some of you, you like very naturally know what to do with the percent and the decimal. You've done it for a long time maybe. You've used it, and so you very fluently and naturally do that. If that is not something that's already a part of who you are, you may be more comfortable always using the proportion. So we can of course be looking for any of the parts. In number 4, we would be looking for our base or our whole. So 0.8 times something is 94. So then we'll divide by 0.8. And when I do 94 divided by 0.8, I get 117.5. Now, sometimes people are like, wait, should the number be bigger? Well, think about what the problem says. If I read it back with my answer, where the what is, 80% of 117.5 is 94. Okay, yeah, that's more than half. 94 is more than half. I mean, it's in a reasonable range. I definitely haven't gone the wrong, directly opposite operation. By the way, just in case the 0.8 threw you off, if I did 0.80, my calculator still gives me the same answer. So I was just being a little lazy about typing that. So we can have percents that are more than 100%. I'm going to jump down to number 8. So I have x is, decimal always goes 2 places to the left if I want to go from percent to decimal. So this is here, 1, 2. So 120% is 1.2 times 20.
Oh, no.
You didn't want some background
All right? So if I were doing that with a proportion, we would have had x over 20, 120 over 100. So since 120 is more than 100, I should expect that my answer is more than 20. It's more than 100% of something, more than the whole thing. So you should have, you don't need to, unless you're just really curious, you could go through and figure out all these setups so you can, but here's your, you can do the QR code. What do you get when you cross a cow and a duck? You can do the QR code to get the answer, but I didn't do that. So now you have an assignment. There is one page that is asking you to do it with proportions, and one page that is asking you to do it with equations. I honestly do not care if you do them all the same way as long as you are getting the correct answers. However, there are a couple that just say set up the proportion. So if it is a setup only problem, then yes, please set up a proportion and then you do not need to solve. Okay, I cut this apart so that it's not so much extra space and confusion of what we would type into a computer. So for instance, number 8, if I say 760, notice the word of the 970. So 970 is my base number, my whole. And then what percent? So x over 100. And then if the directions say set up, and it even says do not try to solve. Okay, so I'm not asking you to solve that. This is as far as I want you to go, to just set it up. So you have 2 sheets that are both double-sided. I think there are about 25 questions maybe total, somewhere close to that. So that's what I'd like you to be working on, is those questions. Okay? And then some of you I need to have do the Ivy Tech application. I have just kind of been putting that off because it wasn't working for Emily to have people try to sign up, so there was no reason for me to even start the process. Some of you have already done the application process, and then at some point we need to go in and enroll you in this class. But my goal today is I will start with people who need to do, it's their first dual credit class, so they need to do the application to Ivy Tech, and then we'll work from there.